The high desert air in Santa Rosa, New Mexico, carried a crisp sweetness in the early morning of May 14, 1991. Sunlight spilled over adobe rooftops and the mesas that framed the horizon, casting warm shadows over the quiet streets. In a town where everyone knew each other's stories, life moved with a gentle rhythm, measured by the hours of work and the seasons of the land. Among those who lent the town its quiet vitality was Cassandra Cassie Moreno, a 28-year-old art teacher whose laughter was as light as the paintbrush she carried from classroom to classroom. She had a small studio at the local community center, where students of all ages gathered to explore their creativity. Cassie's work extended beyond the classroom. She helped organize community murals and volunteered at the town library on weekends, always with the same warm smile. Her small adobe home near the edge of town was painted a soft terracotta, with a courtyard full of marigolds and lavender. A gentle breeze often carried the scent of her herb garden down the narrow streets, where neighbors greeted her by name. People remembered her for her thoughtful attention to detail, whether in her paintings or in the way she listened when someone needed a kind word. On the afternoon of May 13, 1991, Cassie had returned from the high school art show she had helped organize. She waved at familiar faces along the way, stopping briefly to chat with the corner grocer, who remembered her buying fresh tomatoes and green chilies for a homemade meal she was planning. It was a simple, ordinary day, one that, like so many ordinary days in small towns, would be remembered decades later. That evening, Cassie did not return from her evening walk along the quiet river trail that ran near her home. At first, her neighbors thought she might have decided to take a longer route or to visit a friend nearby. But when she hadn't returned by midnight, a quiet worry began to spread. Her roommate, Isabel Ortega, tried calling her house and her cell, but there was no answer. In the small hours, Isabel called the Santa Rosa Police Department. Patrol cars cruised the streets, their lights briefly cutting across the desert night. Officers checked local businesses and familiar haunts, but there was no trace of Cassie. The search began at first light the next day. Volunteers gathered quietly, parents, teachers, students, all of them carrying flashlights and notepads, walking the streets and trails Cassie might have taken. Helicopters flew above the mesas, casting small moving shadows across the sagebrush. Dogs were brought to sniff along the riverbank. Yet for hours the town's bright hope lingered just out of reach. Police officers coordinated their efforts meticulously. Sheriff Miguel Alvarez, a man of calm and steady presence, remembered Cassie as a child visiting her grandmother with her sketchbook always in hand. He organized every available deputy and volunteer, keeping the search thorough but gentle, aware of the anxiety building quietly in the town. Days became weeks. Flyers were distributed in the post office, the library, and the diner where Cassie often spent her mornings sipping coffee. News crews visited, broadcasting the search across the state. Yet despite every effort, the trail went cold. Cassie Moreno's name became part of whispered conversations, spoken with care, never fear, as neighbors held on to the hope that she would return safely. In the years that followed, the case remained open but unsolved. The community continued its gentle life. Children grew up, local businesses changed hands, and the desert winds shifted through the same mesas as always. Cassie's absence became a quiet thread woven into the town's memory, a reminder of the fragility of ordinary days. Then, in 2018, the case stirred again in the most unexpected way. At the New Mexico State Forensic Laboratory, a technician named Lena Chavez was reviewing decades-old evidence from cold cases to digitize and preserve materials for modern analysis. Among the items was a small bag labeled C. Moreno, River Trail Evidence, containing a few personal items found near the trail, a scarf, a notebook, and a single glove. Chavez carefully examined the items. Despite the passage of time, she found traces of DNA on the scarf. It was faint, degraded by the desert sun and the passing years, but it was enough to run through the newly updated CODIS database, capable of matching profiles even from small or partial samples. A few days later, a soft ping echoed across the lab monitors, a match. It was unexpected, linking the material to a man named Thomas Renner, who had lived in the area in 1991 but had since relocated to Albuquerque. He had a brief record from a minor civil matter, but nothing that had ever raised alarm. The discovery reopened the case in a way no one had anticipated. Sheriff Alvarez, now retired, was called in as a consultant, while Detective Mia Rivera, a thoughtful and patient investigator, took the lead. Rivera had been drawn to the case because of its quiet complexity, and she approached it with the same care she gave all cases, listening first, observing second, and acting only when the truth became clear. Rivera began piecing together the events of May 1991. Witnesses recalled seeing Cassie leaving her home that evening, strolling along the trail with a sketchbook in hand. Others remembered her stopping to watch the sunset over the river, pausing to capture the light in the air and water. Each recollection, though small, helped construct a timeline that slowly filled in the blank spaces of that night. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the DNA sample confirmed its match to Renner. The small detail overlooked in 1991 now became pivotal. It was enough to request a new warrant and to approach him with questions. Rivera and her team traveled to Albuquerque. They observed him quietly for several days, learning his routine. To neighbors, he appeared polite, courteous, and unassuming, the type of man who might help a neighbor fix a fence without ever drawing attention to himself. But now, with the knowledge of modern forensic evidence, the investigators could see the connection that had eluded them decades earlier. When they made contact, Thomas Renner answered the door with measured politeness. Detective Rivera introduced herself calmly, explaining that they were investigating a long unsolved case. Renner listened, nodding with a neutral expression. He agreed to provide a sample of his DNA, which matched perfectly to the evidence from 1991. The match gave investigators the clarity they needed. They returned to Santa Rosa, working with local authorities to plan a careful, measured approach to making an arrest. All actions were carried out with the intent of honoring Cassie Moreno's memory, never losing sight of the human aspect of the case. The news of the arrest reached Santa Rosa quietly at first. People remembered Cassie's bright smile, her laughter in the art studio, and her gentle presence in town. For them, the discovery brought not shock or fear, but a sense of quiet relief. The mystery that had lingered for decades was finally becoming a story with resolution. Detective Rivera traveled to meet with Cassie's parents, Elena and Jorge Moreno, now elderly but still full of the same warmth that had raised their daughter. She explained the findings with careful words, allowing the family to absorb the news at their own pace. The moment was full of calm reflection, a quiet acknowledgement that the years of unanswered questions were ending. Elena reached out and held Rivera's hand. "I always hoped someone would find her," she said softly. "Thank you for not forgetting." Jorge nodded, his eyes moist but steady. "It's been a long wait, but I feel at peace knowing the truth." As the sun set over Santa Rosa that evening, the desert glowed in hues of gold and pink. Detective Rivera walked along the same trail Cassie had once taken, reflecting on the decades of patience and care that had brought the case to this point. The wind whispered softly through the juniper and sagebrush, as though carrying the quiet acknowledgement of a life remembered. Cassie's disappearance in 1991, the careful but patient investigation, and the quiet breakthrough decades later that would lead to closure for her family. Detective Mia Rivera returned to Santa Rosa in the early morning light, her thoughts already on the delicate steps ahead. The quiet streets held a familiarity that seemed unchanged by the passage of decades. The adobe buildings, the rustling leaves along the river trail, the soft hum of the wind over the mesas, all of it carried the memory of Cassie Moreno, a memory she now carried with her in every deliberate action. Rivera's first task was to revisit the original evidence with fresh eyes. The items recovered near the river trail in 1991 had been stored carefully, but technological limitations at the time had left their potential untapped. The scarf, the notebook, and the single glove were now being reanalyzed in the state laboratory, and each fragment seemed to speak quietly of the events that had long been left unspoken. She met with forensic technician Lena Chavez again, who had first discovered the viable DNA sample. Chavez explained each step of the updated testing process, showing how the new techniques could detect genetic material even after decades of exposure to the desert sun. Rivera listened intently, noting how the fibers and traces now painted a clearer picture of that night. The scarf, once thought insignificant, contained fibers consistent with materials found in Thomas Renner's home from 1991. Combined with the partial DNA, the connection grew undeniable. Rivera knew this was the key, the moment when the long-forgotten trail would lead to tangible action. Next, she interviewed local witnesses from 1991 who still lived in town. One by one, they recounted details of that spring evening. Luis Medina, a neighbor who had often seen Cassie on her evening walks, remembered her carrying her sketchbook, occasionally pausing to capture the colors of the sky. She loved that river trail, he said. Always stopped to watch the sunset or the reflections on the water. She had this quiet joy. It stayed with everyone she met. Another witness, Rosa Aguilar, who ran the corner grocery, recalled seeing Cassie pick fresh vegetables that afternoon. She waved at everyone she passed, always polite, always smiling. You could tell she cared about the people around her, Rosa said, her voice soft but steady. Every recollection added depth to Cassie's story, forming a vivid portrait of her life and the warmth she had brought to her community. Rivera felt the weight of responsibility. This case was no longer simply about evidence, it was about restoring the full story of a woman whose life had been interrupted. With a clear picture of the past, Rivera and her team returned to Albuquerque to plan a careful approach. Thomas Renner still lived in a quiet neighborhood, blending into his surroundings as an unassuming figure. Rivera observed his routine, noting small details, the time he left his home, his interactions with neighbors, and his weekend trips to local markets. Each observation was conducted with precision, aimed at ensuring the eventual contact would be safe, measured, and dignified. When the day came to make contact, Rivera and two officers approached Renner's residence. He answered the door politely, appearing composed. Rivera introduced herself with calm professionalism. Mr. Renner, we are following up on an ongoing investigation from 1991 regarding Cassie Moreno. We would like to ask you some questions. Renner listened quietly, nodding. I understand, he said. His demeanor was polite, measured, almost neutral, yet Rivera noticed the brief hesitation, the subtle shift in posture, as he processed the years and the presence of law enforcement at his door. During questioning, Renner acknowledged knowing Cassie, describing her as a talented, kind-hearted teacher who cared for everyone she met. He recounted brief interactions they had shared in 1991, emphasizing that they were always casual and friendly. Rivera presented the DNA match from the scarf and other items found at the river trail. Renner's calm exterior wavered slightly, the weight of decades pressing quietly in the room. I remember her walking along that trail, he said softly. I never meant for things to go this way. Rivera maintained a steady tone, allowing him space to speak while carefully documenting his words. She understood that the goal was clarity and closure, not confrontation. We just need to understand what happened that evening, she said. Your cooperation helps bring that story to light. Over the next several days, Renner voluntarily provided further details, revealing small but important facts that aligned with the physical evidence. Investigators located subtle locations he mentioned, hidden paths near the river, areas that had shifted over decades due to natural growth and erosion. Each revelation was documented carefully, building a coherent narrative of the night Cassie disappeared. Meanwhile, Rivera coordinated with Santa Rosa authorities to ensure that the arrest would be handled sensitively. The plan was to inform Cassie's family ahead of time, allowing them to prepare and participate in the process with dignity. When, the day of the arrest arrived, the sun shone brightly over the town, highlighting the quiet beauty of the desert landscape. Elena and Jorge Moreno were present at the local police station, joined by Detective Rivera and a few officers who had long been part of the case. Rivera explained each step to the family, emphasizing that their involvement was central to the process. Renner was escorted into custody without incident. He remained composed, understanding the gravity of the situation, yet quiet and respectful throughout. Rivera observed the proceedings with a sense of calm satisfaction. Decades of meticulous work, gentle persistence, and patient observation had led to this moment. Word of the arrest spread throughout Santa Rosa and surrounding areas. Residents who had long held memories of Cassie in quiet reflection expressed a sense of resolution. Local newspapers covered the story with an emphasis on the careful investigative work and the dedication of law enforcement to uncovering truth. In the days that followed, the Moreno family began the process of healing and closure. Rivera spent time with them, helping to explain the evidence and the investigative steps. "Your daughter's story has been heard," Rivera said, "and now it can finally be told in full." Elena Moreno looked at her daughter's photo on the mantelpiece, her hands clasped tightly. "It's been a long journey," she said softly, "but I feel at peace knowing she will be remembered fully, her story complete." The town of Santa Rosa also began a subtle transformation. A small garden was dedicated near the community center where Cassie had taught, with a plaque commemorating her life and contributions. Students, neighbors, and friends planted flowers, bright marigolds and lavender, reflecting the warmth she had shared with everyone. The memorial garden became a quiet place of reflection, a space where the community could honor her memory without sadness, celebrating the life she had led and the story that had finally been brought to light. As the investigation transitioned into the trial phase, Rivera remained closely involved, ensuring that every step was conducted with respect and precision. The case file, once dusty and forgotten, had been transformed into a narrative of clarity, a story where the truth was honored, and the individual at its center, Cassie Moreno, was celebrated rather than forgotten. For Rivera, the work was also a personal affirmation. It demonstrated that patient, careful investigation, combined with new technology and a commitment to thoroughness, could illuminate even the quietest mysteries. Each step taken with care brought a sense of justice, not as punishment, but as recognition of a life that mattered. The foundation was set for the final chapter, the trial, public closure, and the community's shared reflection on decades of patience and hope. Cassie Moreno's story, once interrupted, was now moving steadily toward its rightful place, remembered, honored, and complete. The courthouse in Santa Rosa welcomed the spring sun, its adobe walls glowing warmly against the clear blue sky. Inside, the town gathered quietly, a mixture of longtime residents, former students, and friends of Cassandra Moreno. Everyone carried a sense of anticipation, not fear but a shared hope that after nearly 3 decades the final chapter of Cassie's story would unfold. Detective Mia Rivera arrived early, walking through the familiar corridors with a steady calm. For her, this trial wasn't just a formality. It was the culmination of years of careful observation, patient investigation, and unwavering dedication. She carried with her a small photograph of Cassie smiling at her students, a simple image that captured the warmth and generosity that had made her a beloved figure in the community. The courtroom filled gradually. Among those present were Elena and Jorge Moreno, Cassie's parents, their hands intertwined as they quietly reviewed the programs prepared for the day. Former colleagues of Cassie and neighbors who had participated in the initial search sat nearby, their eyes reflecting a mixture of remembrance and quiet expectation. At the defense table sat Thomas Renner, his expression calm, almost meditative. Though he had long accepted the inevitability of the trial, the air in the room seemed to carry the weight of decades gone by. Renner's posture was respectful, his hands resting lightly on the table before him. He maintained eye contact with the attorneys but avoided looking at the family directly. The prosecutor, Thomas Avery, began with deliberate calm. "Today," he said, "we bring forward a story long held in the hearts of a community. A story of a remarkable woman whose life touched so many. We honor her memory by telling the truth and presenting the facts with clarity." Avery presented the evidence chronologically. He spoke of Cassie's last day, detailing her walk along the river trail, the items recovered, and the careful observations collected over decades. He described the DNA match that linked Renner to the evidence, explaining the new forensic technology with clarity that made its significance unmistakable. Witnesses from the original investigation recounted their memories, painting a vivid picture of Cassie's life, her patience with students, her dedication to her art, and her quiet, thoughtful nature that had left a lasting impact on the community. Each account added dimension to a narrative that had been paused for nearly 30 years. Elena Moreno was invited to speak. Her voice was gentle yet steady as she described her daughter's character. "Cassie brought light wherever she went," she said. "Her laughter, her kindness, and her talent left an impression on everyone she met. We always believed her story deserved to be complete, and today, it finally will be." Detective Rivera presented a timeline of events, detailing how modern forensic techniques had uncovered the evidence that had remained dormant for decades. Each step of the investigation was laid out with care, emphasizing the meticulous attention to detail and the patience required to bridge the gap between the past and the present. When the defense presented its case, they did so without dispute of the evidence but emphasized context, focusing on Renner's intentions, which they argued were never harmful. They acknowledged the passage of time and his cooperative demeanor, but left the details of accountability to the court. The tone was calm, professional, and measured, consistent with the spirit of the trial. Witness testimonies continued over several days. Former students spoke of Cassie's encouragement, her guidance, and the quiet inspiration she provided in the classroom. Neighbors recalled her care for the community, often assisting with local events or helping those in need. These accounts reinforced the enduring impact of her presence and the deep connection she had to Santa Rosa. When Claire Moreno, Cassie's younger cousin, took the stand, she did so with poise. Her voice carried the warmth of memory rather than sorrow. "Cassie taught me to see beauty in small things," she said. "Even after all these years, her influence remains. Today we honor that influence by telling her story fully." The jury deliberated carefully. The evidence was clear, the narrative complete, and the voices of the community interwoven with the facts. Hours passed and the courtroom remained silent, each person present absorbed in reflection. At last the foreperson stood. "We have reached a verdict," the bailiff announced. All eyes turned as the slip of paper was handed to the judge. The judge read the words aloud, each syllable carrying the weight of decades of patience. On the charge regarding the disappearance of Cassandra Moreno in 1991, the jury finds the defendant, Thomas Renner, guilty. A collective exhale filled the room. A soft, almost reverent sound. Families embraced quietly, neighbors nodded to one another, acknowledging the long journey toward this day. The verdict was more than legal. It was a shared resolution, a culmination of decades of care, attention, and hope. Renner remained composed as he was escorted from the courtroom, acknowledging the gravity of the moment with quiet dignity. The process had been calm and orderly, reflecting the care with which investigators, prosecutors, and the community had approached every step. Outside, the town seemed to exhale as well. Residents gathered quietly near the community center, reflecting on the life of Cassie Moreno and the perseverance that had brought her story to light. Flowers were placed along the river trail, and students of the community center organized a small art exhibit celebrating her work. Detective Rivera walked the trail herself, noting the gentle sway of the wildflowers in the wind. She paused at a spot overlooking the river where Cassie had often sketched the sunset. The view was timeless, just as Cassie's influence was enduring. Rivera placed a small, simple bouquet of marigolds and lavender at the edge of the trail, honoring the woman whose life had inspired generations. The Moreno family participated in the memorial quietly, their faces reflecting gratitude and peace. Elena Moreno whispered softly, "Her story is complete. Thank you for bringing her home." Rivera observed the scene with a sense of calm satisfaction. The investigation had been thorough, respectful, and persistent. The community had participated in honoring a life well lived, and the resolution of the case provided a gentle affirmation that truth could prevail, even after decades. In the weeks following the trial, Santa Rosa held a small commemorative ceremony at the community center, celebrating Cassie Moreno's life and contributions. Students displayed paintings she had inspired, neighbors shared memories, and a plaque was installed along the river trail. In memory of Cassandra Moreno, 1963-1991, her light continues to inspire us. Detective Rivera continued her work in the region, using the methods and lessons learned from this case to guide investigations of other long unsolved mysteries. The case became a model for careful, patient investigative work that honored both evidence and the lives affected. For the community, the resolution was more than closure. It was a celebration of life, resilience, and the enduring impact of one person's presence. Parents spoke of Cassie's influence on their children. Former students carried her lessons into their own teaching, and the quiet beauty of the town reflected the peaceful acknowledgement of a story finally complete. As the desert sun set over the mesas, Rivera stood on the river trail one last time, feeling the calm wind brush against her face. The trail, once a site of uncertainty, had become a place of reflection and remembrance. Cassie Moreno's story, paused for nearly 3 decades, now had its rightful place in the hearts of the people she had touched. And in that quiet moment, it was clear that while time had separated events, it had never diminished the significance of a life well lived. The truth had emerged, the community had celebrated, and the enduring light of one remarkable woman shone across Santa Rosa, a gentle, steady illumination for all who remembered. Cassie Moreno's journey, long paused in mystery, was now a testament to the power of persistence, care, and the belief that every story deserves to be complete. In the high desert of New Mexico, her legacy lived on, not in sorrow but in the quiet shared joy of a life remembered and honored fully.